$19 billion? How is this possible? Why didn't you tell me, Evan?
I suspected you might find out eventually.
Mara Delacroix had never been given a choice. Her life had always been dictated by her father, a man whose actions revolved around securing his own future, regardless of the cost to her. So when he found himself deep in debt to a wealthy businessman, Mara knew what was coming. In a quiet conversation between her father and a stranger, Mara was sold. She was 26 years old. She had survived her mother's death, her father's gambling, the eviction notices he hid under the kitchen mat, and the shame that came with all of it. She had survived it all by going numb, by feeling absolutely nothing. That was her superpower, her armor, and she wore it like a second skin. So when her father sat her down one gray Tuesday evening, his eyes red, his hands trembling around a glass of whiskey, and told her she was to marry a man named Evan Carlisle by the end of the month, Mara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him and said, "Fine." She had learned long ago that tears were wasted on a man who would forget them by morning. Please, can I ask for a favor? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Now, let's dive into the story. Mara arrived at Evan Carlisle's home on a Saturday morning. She had expected something grand, something that matched the desperate hunger in her father's eyes when he'd spoken of the deal. Instead, she found a small terraced house on a quiet street with a faded welcome mat at the door and a potted geranium by the window that someone had clearly been trying very hard to keep alive. The man who opened the door was nothing like what she'd imagined. Evan Carlisle was tall, with kind eyes and a jawline dusted with a few days' worth of stubble. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. He looked like someone who fixed his own leaky taps and ate dinner at a proper table. He held out his hand and said, "You must be Mara. Come in, I've made tea." Mara stared at the hand, then at him. "I don't drink tea," she said flatly. He nodded slowly. "Coffee, then." She walked inside. The house smelled like toast and something warm. Cinnamon, maybe, or vanilla. On the living room floor, a 5-year-old girl sat surrounded by building blocks, constructing what appeared to be a very ambitious castle. She looked up when Mara walked in. "Are you my new mummy?" she asked. Mara's chest tightened in a way she hadn't expected. She looked at Evan. He looked embarrassed, crouching down beside his daughter. "Emily, what did we talk about?" he said gently. "That I shouldn't ask that straight away," Emily recited, very seriously. "And what did you do?" "I asked it straight away." "Yes, you did." Emily turned back to her blocks, unbothered. Mara stood in the middle of the living room and felt something strange happen. The corner of her mouth moved. Almost. Just barely. The closest thing to a smile she'd allowed herself in years. She caught herself and stopped it immediately. The first 2 weeks of their marriage were like walking on glass. Polite, careful, absolutely exhausting. They had separate rooms. They ate breakfast at the same table and passed the butter without speaking. Evan never pushed. He never asked her to be warmer, never complained that she barely looked at him, never once made her feel like she owed him anything beyond sharing a roof. That, in itself, confused her deeply. She had spent her entire life around men who took. Her father took her peace, her savings, her future. The men she'd briefly dated had taken her time, her energy, her kindness, and left without saying thank you. She didn't understand a man who simply gave, quietly, without expectation. One evening, she came downstairs past midnight because she couldn't sleep, and found Evan at the kitchen table with Emily asleep in his arms, a children's book fallen open on the floor beside him. He'd clearly sat down to read to her and simply hadn't moved when she drifted off. His back had to be aching. He didn't move anyway. Mara stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them. Something inside her cracked. Not loudly, like the first hairline fracture in ice, the kind you don't notice until the whole sheet begins to shift. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2. She started noticing small things. The way Evan always left the porch light on for her when she worked late. The way he never read her messages over her shoulder or asked where she was going. The way he taught Emily to apologize sincerely, not just with words, but by looking the other person in the eye. Whenever Mara cooked and it wasn't quite right, he ate it without a word of complaint and said, "That was good." Once, just once, Mara cooked a chicken stew that was genuinely awful. It was too salty, the vegetables were mushy, and the sauce had the consistency of thin water. As she set the bowl down in front of him, she braced herself for the inevitable look of disappointment. But instead, Evan quietly took another spoonful, his expression calm and steady. "You don't have to do that," she said, staring at him, her voice tinged with disbelief. Evan looked up at her with a gentle smile, chewing thoughtfully. "I know," he replied, his eyes full of warmth. "But it's not about the stew, is it?" Mara blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected this. He took another bite, and with a playful glint in his eye, added, "This meal has potential." Mara shook her head, a small, reluctant smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She couldn't help but laugh, despite herself. "It's awful, Evan." "It's better than awful," he said softly. "It's a reminder that we're all just doing our best." Her heart melted a little. It wasn't just about the food. It was about his unwavering support. He wasn't perfect, but his kindness was. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when everything changed. Evan had taken Emily to her grandmother's for the weekend. The house was quiet in a way that felt unusual now. She had gotten used to the noise of it, the laughter and the little feet on the stairs. Mara was clearing out the spare room when she found a box of old files pushed into the back of the attic space. She wouldn't have thought anything of it, but the top folder slipped open as she lifted the box, and a page fluttered out. A financial statement with a letterhead that stopped her cold. Carlisle Enterprises, Global Division. She set the box down. She picked up the page. Then she picked up another. And another. The numbers didn't make sense at first. She read them 3 times. Then she sat on the dusty attic floor and read them a 4th time, because her brain was refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. Carlisle Enterprises wasn't just a business. It was a multinational corporation with offices across 4 continents. The accounts she was holding, just a fragment of the whole picture, reflected assets in the billions. Not millions. Billions. $19 billion. Her husband, the man who drove a 7-year-old car and haggled politely with the market vendor over the price of tomatoes, was worth $19 billion. She was standing in the kitchen when he walked through the front door that Sunday evening, Emily chattering beside him about a bird she'd seen at Grandma's garden that she was convinced was magical. Mara looked at him. He looked at her. Something in her expression must have told him everything, because he went still. "Emily, sweetheart," he said quietly, "go wash your hands for dinner." Emily skipped away. The kitchen was suddenly very, very silent. "You knew I'd find out eventually," Mara said. Her voice was calm, that trained, practiced calm she'd perfected over a lifetime. 19 billion, Evan. He said nothing. You drove me to the supermarket last week and complained that the parking was £2.50. Her voice cracked, just slightly. You ate my terrible chicken stew, twice. It had potential, you said. Stop. She pressed her hand to her forehead. Why? Just why? Why did you hide it? Why the small house and the modest life and why all of it? Evan sat down at the kitchen table. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and careful, like a man who had waited a long time to say something true. Because I watched what money did to people around me, he said. I watched it hollow out relationships, turn people into things they didn't want to be. And when Emily's mother left, not because of the money, but because of the world it changed her into, I finally understood. She'd gone from being a loving wife to someone I didn't even recognize. Once the money came in, she became a different person. Suddenly, every weekend was about clubbing, about rubbing elbows with other socialites. She would nag me for not being part of that world, calling me boring, telling me I didn't understand the new life she'd found. She was always chasing the next party, the next event, and she didn't care about anything else. One morning, she just announced she was leaving, said she wanted to be with someone who could keep up with her lifestyle, someone who shared her newfound love for that shallow world. I was just left standing there, wondering when the woman I married had disappeared. Evan's voice grew softer, filled with a deep sorrow. But Emily's mom, my ex, later got married, had 2 kids with her lover, and it all spiraled. She got hooked on alcohol and smoking, and couldn't handle it. She ended up in rehab, acting like a shell of the person she once was. She didn't follow simple instructions about drinking and smoking wisely, and it left her behaving like a lunatic. Funny enough, her lover couldn't take it anymore and abandoned her. But despite everything, I made sure the best doctors attended to her because of Emily. She's still her mother, and I couldn't let her fall apart without trying. I hope when she's discharged, she'll learn her lesson, but it's not my place to force that on her anymore. I just did what I could to help for Emily's sake. He paused. If you are enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Back to the story. And when your father approached me about this arrangement, I know how that sounds. I know. But I saw you. I saw a photograph, and I read a little about you, and you had this look on your face that I recognized. Mara's throat tightened. What look? The look of someone who's been carrying something heavy for so long, they've forgotten what it feels like to put it down. The silence stretched between them. I didn't want you to marry a billionaire, he said simply. I wanted you to meet a man and decide for yourself. She didn't speak to him for 3 days, not because she was angry, though she was, a little, but because she needed to think without his quiet presence, making it impossible to be rational. She needed to sit with what she felt, which was terrifying, because what she felt was real. It wasn't gratitude or obligation or the slow resignation of someone making peace with a bad deal. It was something far more dangerous. She loved him. She loved the man who ate her bad cooking and kept the porch light on and held his sleeping daughter all night because he didn't want to disturb her rest. She loved the way he laughed, rare and genuine, never performed. She loved that he had built a soft, warm, honest life around his little girl and then quietly made room in it for Mara without demanding anything in return. She hadn't been sold after all, she realized, or maybe she had been, but somewhere along the way she had bought herself back, piece by piece, laugh by laugh, midnight by quiet midnight. On the fourth day, she went to find him. He was in the garden with Emily, helping her build a birdhouse from a kit. Emily was hammering with tremendous enthusiasm and very little accuracy. Evan was patiently repositioning nails. Mara stood at the back door and watched them for a moment. Then she walked out and sat cross-legged in the grass beside Emily. "Can I help?" she asked. Emily handed her the hammer without hesitation. "You can do the hard bits," she said. "Daddy keeps flinching." Evan looked at Mara. His eyes were careful, searching. Mara picked up the nail. She drove it in clean and straight on the first strike. "Show off," he murmured. "I grew up in a house that was always falling apart," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "You learned to fix things yourself." He reached over and covered her hand with his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Now, here is the part of this story where we talk about Mara's father. Because no story about karma is complete without watching the wicked reap what they've sown. Raymond Delacroix had thought himself clever when he sold his daughter's future to settle his debts, believing that the sacrifices he made would allow him to return to his indulgent, carefree lifestyle. But his luck ran out. His gambling addiction, which had always been the source of his problems, drained him of everything he had left: his money, his dignity, and his relationships. He squandered his opportunities with reckless abandon, unable to break free from the cycle he had created. One night, after a particularly heavy binge, Raymond found himself in a bad situation, another drunken accident that led him to the hospital. The doctors informed him that his injuries were severe and would require intensive care. But it wasn't the physical pain that hit him hardest. It was the crushing weight of his regret. He had used his own hands to gamble away his family's future. He had chased a life of fleeting pleasures, but in the end, the price of his choices had cost him everything: his relationships, his respect, and the very foundation of the life he once had. As he lay in that hospital bed, he cried not just for his injuries, but for the life he had destroyed, all in the name of selfishness. One evening, Mara crossed the hallway and put her arms around him, and he held her, his embrace warm and reassuring, as it always had been. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Mara Delacroix felt completely, utterly safe. That night, their closeness wasn't just about the quiet, tender touch. It was the soft, unspoken promise of a love that had never wavered. As they shared the space between them, hearts full of affection, Mara realized just how deeply she had come to trust him, how deeply she had always been cherished by him. In his arms, she found her peace, a love so gentle yet powerful, it made the world feel right again. 6 months later, she sat at her desk in the small studio they'd converted from the spare room, her workspace now full of color swatches and sketches and the good grounding smell of fresh coffee, and stared at the screen in front of her. Her first freelance design client had just approved her final submission. She read the email 3 times. Then she put her face in her hands and laughed. Really laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised and free. "Good news?" She looked up. Evan was leaning in the doorway, Emily peeking around his legs. "I got it," Mara said. "My first real client. They loved it." Emily shot past her father with a shriek of delight and threw her small arms around Mara's waist. "That means ice cream," she announced. "Daddy said if you got it, we could have ice cream." Mara looked at Evan over Emily's head. "You said that?" He shrugged, but his eyes were soft and bright. "I had a feeling." She stood up. She took his face in her hands. This man with his 7-year-old car and his patient heart and his 19 billion reasons to be arrogant, and not one arrogant bone in his body, and she kissed him slow and warm and certain. Emily made a noise of profound disgust. "You're doing the kissing again." "We are," Evan agreed, not remotely sorry. A few months later, Mara, heavily pregnant, gave birth to a beautiful son. As she held their baby for the first time, surrounded by Evan and Emily, her heart swelled with love. Emily, excited to become a big sister, beamed with joy as she carefully held her baby brother's hand. Together, the family embraced the new chapter of their lives. With Evan by her side and Emily's innocent laughter filling the house, Mara finally felt the warmth and love she had always longed for. Their family was complete, and the life she had dreamed of, filled with love, warmth, and endless possibilities, was now a beautiful reality. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.